In a room filled with journalists and political elites, one voice rose above the noise, and it left everyone speechless. The cameras clicked, the teleprompters hummed, and the usual chatter of analysts and anchors hung like static in the air. But then Jasmine Crockett spoke, and suddenly the world outside the studio seemed to fade. The usual rhythm of political banter stopped. Every eye turned to her. Every ear leaned in. The silence was deafening. Kaitlan Collins, usually composed and commanding behind the desk, blinked once, twice, as if confirming what she had just heard. Her pen hovered midair. Her notes, meticulously prepared for 1,000 potential angles, suddenly felt irrelevant. There was a pause, a breath, and then a subtle tilt of her head. Disbelief mingled with admiration. The room, accustomed to controlled debates and rehearsed talking points, had never experienced a presence like this. Crockett's words were not just statements. They were a challenge, a declaration of truth, a refusal to bow to fear or expectation. The studio lights glinted off the polished surfaces, reflecting the tension that had gripped every participant. Behind her calm exterior, Crockett carried the weight of experience, of struggle, of battles fought in courtrooms, community halls, and legislative chambers. Her eyes, steady and unwavering, carried a quiet confidence that belied the seismic nature of what she had just uttered. There was no arrogance, no bluster, just clarity, precision, and a vision that demanded attention. The commentators' mouths opened only to close again. The hum of equipment became the heartbeat of anticipation. Viewers at home would later describe it as the moment time seemed to pause, a collective intake of breath from a nation watching, waiting, unsure whether to gasp, cheer, or simply sit in stunned reflection. Even those predisposed to skepticism could not ignore the weight of her presence. And in that charged silence, a single truth became undeniable. Something had shifted. Something irreversible. Kaitlan's eyes met the lens, and for a fleeting instant, the entire studio seemed to acknowledge the gravity of the moment. But what she said next would ripple far beyond this studio. History doesn't wait, and neither did she. Jasmine Crockett's words were not merely a soundbite for television. They were a declaration at a time when the nation's divisions had never been more stark. In the corridors of power, policies were debated behind closed doors. Laws were twisted by loopholes, and communities that had long been ignored bore the weight of systemic injustice. Yet here she was in a live broadcast watched by millions, refusing to speak in whispers or equivocate for comfort. Every phrase she delivered cut through layers of political noise, exposing the stakes for everyone watching. The voters, the marginalized, the citizens who had grown weary of promises unmet. Across the political landscape, tension had been mounting for months. Gerrymandering, stalled legislation, and escalating partisan theatrics had created a theater of frustration and cynicism. People on both sides of the aisle whispered about compromise, but compromise had long failed those most in need. Crockett understood this intimately. She had seen constituents denied fair representation, communities crushed by economic disparity, and the very principles of justice manipulated for power. Her statement in the studio was not abstract. It was a mirror reflecting a nation at a crossroads. The audience at home could feel it. The weight of responsibility pressed into every word, a challenge issued not just to the political class, but to every citizen watching. Will we rise, or will we let history repeat its mistakes? In that charged moment, the stakes became unmistakably personal. Crockett's vision demanded accountability. It demanded that those who had long assumed control and privilege confront the consequences of their arrogance. Her voice carried the hopes of those who had been dismissed, marginalized, or silenced, and she did it without rancor, without theatrics, without pandering, just clarity, courage, and an unwavering insistence on what was right. It was a moral compass held up in a room clouded by cynicism and self-interest, and it drew the eyes of the nation toward a moment of reckoning. And yet, the villains of this story, the political operatives, the pundits who favored spectacle over substance, the entrenched interests who thrived on distraction, underestimated her. They had grown accustomed to voices that bent to the rhythm of compromise, that played for optics rather than truth. They assumed her calm demeanor signaled weakness, her measured tone a lack of fire, but Crockett's presence was a silent warning. They had misread the room, misread the audience, and most importantly, misread her resolve. The very arrogance that had long insulated them from accountability now left them vulnerable to a reckoning they could neither predict nor contain. As the studio cameras lingered on her, capturing the stillness that followed her words, the sense of anticipation thickened. Viewers at home could almost hear the nation holding its breath, waiting for the response, waiting for the unfolding consequences. This was not a moment to be missed. History was happening in real time, and the question remained: would the forces of obstruction and entitlement rise to meet her challenge, or would they crumble in the face of unflinching truth? The villains of this story did not emerge overnight. They were a product of decades of power preserved through entitlement, spectacle, and calculated indifference. In political offices and media echo chambers alike, they had perfected the art of self-preservation, cloaked in authority, and bolstered by the complacency of a system designed to protect their privilege. Their tactics were familiar: deflect, distract, dismiss. Every challenge to their dominance was met with the same rehearsed arrogance, the same thinly veiled contempt for those who dared speak truth. And yet, despite the sophistication of their defenses, cracks were beginning to show. Take, for instance, the senior figure whose influence shaped countless policies under the guise of pragmatism. To the public, he was a master of experience, a voice of reason in tumultuous times. But behind closed doors, his record told a different story. Decisions that favored the powerful at the expense of communities struggling to survive. Public statements polished for optics yet void of accountability, and a network of alliances that thrived on exploiting fear rather than addressing need. His dismissive rhetoric toward grassroots movements and reform advocates had become predictable, almost mechanical, but it still carried weight, enough to silence ordinary voices, if not extraordinary ones. Then there were the media gatekeepers, commentators who thrived on conflict and spectacle, skilled in framing every debate as a circus rather than a forum for substance. Their questions were sharp, their tone biting, but it was all carefully calculated theater. They knew how to manufacture outrage, how to paint principled voices as impractical, how to reduce complex issues to sound bites that fed the cycle of cynicism. And yet their most dangerous flaw was not incompetence. It was hubris. They assumed control of the narrative by default, believing that the public would never look past their carefully constructed personas. Even within legislative halls, the opposition had cultivated an image of steadfast control. Their public personas were untouchable, built on a combination of seniority, loyalty networks, and media familiarity. Every critique from a newcomer or reformist was met with the same arsenal: sarcasm, dismissal, and strategic delay. They wielded procedural expertise like a weapon, turning rules meant to govern fairly into instruments of obstruction. It was a system reinforced by decades of precedent, and yet it was brittle in ways only a keen observer could detect. One misstep, one unforeseen challenge could crack the veneer of infallibility, and so the pattern was clear. Arrogance cloaked in experience, spectacle masquerading as authority, and an unshakable belief that their dominion was untouchable. They had underestimated empathy, underappreciated courage, and dismissed integrity as an abstract luxury. But their miscalculations were not limited to personal flaws. They were systemic. Each policy crafted to maintain control, each media moment engineered to intimidate, each dismissive remark aimed at silencing opposition. All of it was designed to maintain a hierarchy that resisted change. And yet, in their hubris, they failed to account for the forces they could not predict. The irony, almost poetic in its inevitability, was that the very qualities they scorned, resilience, moral clarity, and unwavering commitment to justice, were precisely what would challenge them most. Their past controversies, once easily brushed aside with polished statements and media spin, were now being held up to the light of scrutiny by a public increasingly unwilling to accept half-truths. Their dismissive smirks, once enough to intimidate junior voices, faltered when faced with someone who refused to be cowed, who understood the stakes on a personal and collective level. The arrogance that had insulated them for years was becoming a liability, a brittle shield against a storm they could neither anticipate nor control. Yet amidst this opposition, a figure forged by struggle was preparing her response. Jasmine Crockett's story was not written in the polished halls of power, nor in the comfort of privilege. It was forged in the crucible of struggle, tempered by the weight of responsibility, and sharpened by an unwavering sense of justice. From the earliest days of her career, she had understood that real change required more than eloquence. It demanded courage, resilience, and the willingness to stand alone when others faltered. Each step she took was a testament to a principle that had guided her life. Integrity is not a choice made in the moment of comfort, but in the face of opposition. Her journey began in courtrooms where the stakes were never theoretical. Representing clients who had been marginalized, overlooked, or silenced, Crockett witnessed firsthand the consequences of a system stacked against those without influence. Each case was a battle not just for a verdict, but for dignity. There were nights spent poring over legal briefs while the world slept, early mornings preparing arguments that could determine the course of someone's life. And yet, through every challenge, she carried herself with calm determination. There was no performative anger, no empty rhetoric, just a steady insistence on what was right, a refusal to accept compromise at the expense of justice. Beyond the courtroom, her advocacy extended into the community. She became a voice for those who felt unseen, traveling neighborhoods often ignored by politicians who measured success by headlines rather than human impact. She listened, she learned, and she acted, whether by championing local initiatives, mentoring young leaders, or holding public officials accountable. Her work was relentless, grounded in a vision that went beyond elections or party lines, focused instead on lifting the lives of ordinary people who had been made to feel invisible. But Crockett's path was not without sacrifice. Long nights of work were balanced against personal moments she missed, celebrations she deferred, and the quiet toll of carrying others' struggles alongside her own. Friends worried about burnout. Critics assumed hesitation, yet she pressed forward, guided by a clarity of purpose that many only pretend to grasp. Every challenge she faced in systemic injustice, political opposition, personal doubt, became a layer of armor, shaping a leader who could not merely navigate the storm, but command it with composure and precision. Her preparation for moments like this studio confrontation was meticulous. She studied not only the policies at hand, but the personalities across the table, the historical context that shaped their arguments, and the societal undercurrents that influenced public perception. Each word she would speak, each pause she would take was honed through experience and reflection. She understood the power of presence, how calm authority could disarm arrogance, how measured insight could pierce spectacle, how a single statement could ripple through a nation hungry for truth. Crockett's integrity was evident in the small, easily overlooked moments as well. The way she treated colleagues, her patience with constituents, the care she showed for each case file and every voter concern, these were not gestures designed for optics. They were the natural expression of someone whose moral compass was absolute. Her reputation was not built on applause but on results, not on media coverage but on the trust she earned in every courtroom, every district office, and every community gathering. It was this combination of experience, empathy, and ethical fortitude that made her presence in the studio so electrifying. When she spoke, it was not just a politician addressing a camera. It was a lifetime of preparation, a convergence of principle and practice, a hero standing firm against the forces of arrogance and obstruction. The weight of her journey could be felt in every syllable, in every pause, in the way she met skepticism with steady eyes and unwavering resolve. The audience, whether seated in the studio or watching from living rooms across the country, could sense the gravity of her purpose, and yet, even with all this preparation, the moment of truth had not arrived. The skeptics, the dismissive commentators, the entrenched powers who underestimated her, all waited to see if her vision could withstand scrutiny. Could her calm authority hold firm against a room trained to challenge, to provoke, to test? Could her principles translate into action in a world that often rewards performance over substance? The stakes were immense, the tension palpable. Every fiber of her being had been trained for this confrontation. Yet the outcome remained uncertain, the suspense almost unbearable. As she adjusted her notes, lifted her gaze, and prepared to speak, there was a quiet understanding in her eyes. This was the moment her journey, her sacrifices, and her unwavering commitment to justice would meet the world's scrutiny head-on. The studio held its collective breath, waiting for the vision that would either inspire or challenge an entire nation. And soon, that vision would collide with the skepticism, the doubts, and the entrenched power of the studio, and the nation outside would not be able to look away. The studio air was electric, crackling with anticipation as Jasmine Crockett leaned forward slightly, her expression calm, eyes steady. The first question came sharp and pointed, delivered by a commentator whose tone carried the weight of dismissal. "Congresswoman Crockett," they began, a subtle edge in their voice. "How do you respond to critics who say your vision is idealistic, impractical in the current political climate?" The room waited for a reaction, expecting hesitation, expecting the slightest falter, but Crockett did not flinch. Instead, she inhaled, paused deliberately, and allowed the silence to stretch just long enough to make the audience lean in. Every eye in the studio, every camera lens seemed to hone in on her. Then with calm authority, she answered. Her words were measured but incisive, cutting through layers of skepticism without a trace of defensiveness. She framed her response not as a rebuttal but as a statement of principle, grounding her argument in tangible realities, while reminding the audience why values mattered in moments like these. The effect was immediate. Murmurs of approval swept quietly through the studio, though the skeptics maintained their masks of doubt. The interruptions began shortly after. Another commentator tried to pivot, pressing with a tone that suggested superiority. "But don't you think, Congresswoman, that implementing these policies could backfire? The logistics, the budgetary implications, aren't these risks too great?" Crockett's hand moved slightly, a subtle gesture that commanded attention. She acknowledged the concern with respect, but reframed it through a lens of accountability and foresight. Her delivery was not hurried, not defensive, but deliberate, as if each word had been chosen to guide the room toward understanding. The tension mounted. Those accustomed to political performances sensed something different here. Authenticity met precision, confidence met empathy, and the combination unsettled even the most hardened cynics. From the gallery, whispers traveled like ripples across still water. Analysts exchanged glances, some skeptical, others quietly impressed. The opposition, trained in the art of rhetorical intimidation, struggled to regain footing. Their lines of attack, rehearsed and rehearsed again in countless strategy meetings, seemed less effective when met with Crockett's clarity and composure. They attempted rhetorical flourishes, veiled criticisms, even subtle patronizing comments, all the usual tactics designed to rattle newcomers and heroes alike. Yet each attempt bounced harmlessly off her armor of preparation, experience, and moral clarity. The audience at home could almost feel the tension through the screen. Each pause, each deliberate syllable, added to the mounting suspense. Would the critics find a crack in her composure? Would the room finally erupt in doubt or disbelief? Every word she spoke seemed to push the debate to a precipice, where stakes were no longer theoretical but deeply personal, a reflection of national priorities and the integrity of leadership itself. Even Kaitlan Collins, seated across from the exchange, could not hide her astonishment. The journalist's expression flickered from curiosity to admiration, then to quiet disbelief. She, along with millions watching live, recognized the significance of what was unfolding. A poised, fearless figure standing firm against the predictable chaos of political theater. The suspense was palpable. The studio seemed to hold its breath. As the debate continued, Crockett's calm authority began to shift the rhythm entirely. The interruptions lost momentum. The skeptical questions began to feel smaller, less intimidating. And somewhere in that charged atmosphere, the stage was being set for the defining moment. The turning point that would transform tension into revelation. A mic-drop moment of clarity, one that could silence doubt, galvanize belief, and leave an indelible mark on everyone watching. The air hung heavy with anticipation. Every viewer, every commentator, every hidden observer in the room could sense it coming. The moment when principle would meet performance, when courage would confront arrogance, and when the truth of Crockett's vision would demand acknowledgement. It was almost upon them. Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, her hands resting lightly on the table, eyes scanning the room with measured precision. The murmurs of skepticism, the rehearsed smirks of opposition, even the faint tapping of pens from journalists, all of it faded into the background. She had waited for this moment, honed it in quiet preparation, and now the air itself seemed to bend around the weight of what she was about to say. The studio leaned in unconsciously, collectively holding its breath. Then, with deliberate calm, she began. Her voice was steady, authoritative, each word chosen as if carved from experience and conviction. For too long we have allowed the narratives of power to define the possibilities of justice, she said. Her pause was calculated, drawing attention to the gravity of her next words. We have seen communities denied representation, families left to struggle under policies crafted without their voices. And we have tolerated it, not because we agreed, but because we accepted the notion that this is the way things must be. The silence that followed was profound, almost reverent. Even the most cynical commentators found themselves frozen, compelled to listen. Crockett continued, each sentence layering moral clarity atop undeniable facts. My vision is not a dream. It is a blueprint forged from reality, from the courthouse to the classroom, from the streets where children grow up hungry for opportunity to the halls of Congress where decisions shape our very lives. This vision is about accountability, equity, and the courage to act when others hesitate. Her voice strengthened slightly, a rising tide that carried conviction without aggression. Every pause, every subtle shift in tone, invited the audience into the rhythm of her argument, letting them feel the weight of history in the room. The opposition tried, as they always do, to interrupt. Congresswoman, isn't that idealistic? Isn't that? But Crockett's calm gaze met theirs, unwavering, and she allowed the silence to answer. Her authority was not loud, it was magnetic, a force that drew attention to the truth of her words. Each attempt at provocation faltered under the precision of her delivery. Where once doubt lingered, admiration began to seep in. Where once skepticism ruled, awe took root. Cinematic reactions rippled through the studio. A camera panned slowly across the commentators, capturing the flicker of disbelief in their eyes, the subtle nods from those recognizing insight when they saw it. Kaitlan Collins' expression shifted from curiosity to shock to quiet, undeniable admiration, as if acknowledging a truth she had not fully anticipated. Behind her, the production crew leaned in subtly, almost instinctively aware that they were witnessing more than a debate. They were witnessing history in motion. Crockett's next words carried both weight and clarity. We cannot allow fear, cynicism, or the comfortable illusions of power to dictate what is possible for our people. Leadership is measured not by applause or optics, but by the courage to stand for what is right, even when standing alone. And that is what we must do, together, with clarity, with empathy, with unyielding commitment to justice. Another pause. Another collective intake of breath. Every syllable resonated beyond the confines of the studio, as if each word were a ripple set to travel across the nation. Social media, even in this imagined instant, exploded. Tweets lit up the virtual airwaves. eViewer 1. Did you see her just drop truth like that? Our Jasmine Crockett, Nasir bold vision. iPolywatch. Calm, composed, unshakable. This is how leadership looks. Inspiration. A next-gen vote. The studio fell silent, and so did my doubts. She sees us. She fights for us. Representation matters. Even before the first post had fully circulated, the collective recognition of impact was undeniable. The studio, historically a theater of control and spectacle, had been transformed by quiet authority and unassailable logic. Crockett's mastery was evident in the way she balanced moral argument with empirical grounding. She did not rely on theatrics or emotional manipulation. Instead, she drew on her experience, her intimate knowledge of law and policy, and her unwavering commitment to truth. Each sentence was a carefully constructed bridge, connecting principle with practicality, empathy with enforceability. And as she spoke, the opposition's rhetorical attacks, so confident at the beginning, seemed smaller, almost trivial, unable to match the weight of a vision grounded in both heart and intellect. Her final flourish came not as a shout, but as a quiet, undeniable challenge. This is not a moment for hesitation. It is a moment for courage. It is a moment for integrity to rise where arrogance has ruled too long. And when we step forward, when we act with vision and purpose, we are unstoppable, not because we are loud, but because we are right. The pause that followed stretched, a suspended heartbeat across the studio. Every camera, every microphone, every eye trained on her with rapt attention. Even the journalists known for their pointed skepticism could not ignore it. One by one, expressions softened. One by one, the realization settled in. She had dismantled doubt not with aggression but with composure, not with insult, but with truth. She had reframed the debate, shifted the narrative, and demanded recognition for a vision that had been ignored far too long. The applause, though delayed, began to ripple through the room. Cautious at first, then swelling as if acknowledging a force that could not be denied. And as the words settled, the studio remained silent, but the world outside erupted. The moment Crockett's words landed, the world outside the studio seemed to catch fire. Social media erupted in a frenzy of validation, admiration, and awe. Within seconds, hashtags began trending nationwide. Jasmine Crockett, bold vision, leadership with integrity. Short clips of her calm yet commanding delivery were shared and reshared, accumulating millions of views as the public dissected every pause, every phrase, every glimmer of authority in her gaze. Influencers weighed in, amplifying the message with comments like, "This is what courage looks like," and finally, "Someone speaks truth with clarity." Memes, videos, and reaction threads multiplied, each iteration celebrating a vision that had long been waiting for recognition. Journalists, even those accustomed to skepticism, were forced to acknowledge the magnitude of what had just occurred. Live panels dissected her words with genuine fascination, framing Crockett not just as a politician, but as a symbol of resilience and moral clarity. Headlines flashed, "Crockett commands studio, captivates nation, and bold vision meets the moment. America watches in awe." Commentators debated the substance of her vision, but there was no disputing the impact. The emotional resonance transcended policy and politics, reaching into the hearts of a populace hungry for authenticity. Politicians across party lines responded with a mix of admiration, curiosity, and cautious recognition. Even those who had previously dismissed her as idealistic were now forced to reckon with the undeniable authority of her argument. Press releases, statements, and interviews poured in, reflecting a ripple effect that extended far beyond the studio walls. The nation's political landscape had shifted, if only subtly, as one figure's clarity and courage illuminated the possibility of leadership, unburdened by ego or spectacle. At the same time, the villains of the story floundered. Their carefully orchestrated attempts at damage control faltered under the weight of Crockett's articulation. Tweets and op-eds intended to undermine her message were met with backlash. Social media users, armed with clips of her precise and compelling argument, dismantled their narratives in real time. Hashtags mocking their failures trended alongside those celebrating Crockett's triumph. Their arrogance, once a shield, became a liability, exposing a stark contrast between empty posturing and genuine leadership. The studio's attempts to normalize the tension or redirect the narrative fell flat as public attention refused to be diverted. Communities that had long been marginalized, ignored, or silenced now felt a sense of empowerment. Viewers tweeted their personal stories expressing gratitude and hope. "She sees us. She fights for us," wrote one. "Finally, someone speaks like we exist," wrote another. These reactions were more than performative. They reflected a deep visceral connection to a vision that acknowledged their struggles and affirmed their dignity. Crockett had not only delivered a statement of principle, but had ignited a collective understanding that courage, preparation, and integrity could break through the noise and reshape perception. Cultural commentators noted the broader significance. In a time when political theatrics often overshadow substance, Crockett's performance reminded the nation that authenticity and moral clarity still commanded attention. Her vision was more than policy. It was an invitation to reimagine the possibilities of leadership. The studio, once a controlled environment for rehearsed debates, had become a stage where the public could witness the extraordinary in action, a microcosm of a country yearning for honesty and empowerment. Even the casual viewer felt it. Across living rooms, offices, and cafes, people paused, replayed clips, and shared them with friends and family. Conversations sparked organically, moving beyond partisan lines as the message of integrity and vision resonated universally. The effect was both immediate and enduring, a collective acknowledgement that leadership was measured not by theatrics or intimidation, but by courage, clarity, and unwavering commitment to what is right. The contrast between the hero and the villains could not have been starker. Where Crockett's vision had rallied admiration, inspiration, and hope, the opposition's arrogance had only intensified scrutiny and ridicule. In their failure to adapt, to listen, or to rise above self-interest, they became a cautionary illustration of what happens when power is exercised without principle. The juxtaposition amplified the impact of her words, leaving viewers with a visceral understanding of the stakes. Courage triumphs where arrogance falters. Integrity endures where spectacle fails. And as the nation absorbed the moment, as hashtags trended, clips circulated, and voices joined in a chorus of recognition, one truth became undeniable: clarity, courage, and moral conviction could transcend opposition, reshape narratives, and inspire collective action. The public had witnessed more than a debate. They had witnessed a hero in her element, challenging the status quo and reminding a divided country what was possible when principle leads. In the quiet aftermath of the storm she had stirred, Jasmine Crockett's vision stood like a beacon, unwavering and unshakable. The studio lights dimmed, the cameras paused, and yet the resonance of her words lingered far beyond the walls of the broadcast room. What had begun as a bold statement of principle had transformed into something far greater, a symbol of integrity, courage, and the enduring power of truth. Viewers across the nation could sense it, even if they were not in the studio itself. A reminder that leadership was measured not by performance or popularity, but by the courage to stand firmly for what is right. Crockett's words had become a lens through which the country could examine itself. Communities who had long been overlooked felt seen, their struggles validated by someone willing to speak not for applause, but for justice. Her vision reminded everyone that dignity is not negotiable, that fairness is not optional, and that the arc of progress bends toward those who act with moral clarity. For many, this was a rare moment of reflection in a world of distraction, a chance to consider the principles that truly matter, beyond partisanship and spectacle. The ripple effect was profound. Conversations sparked across living rooms, social media threads, and community centers, all focused on a single truth. One person's conviction could galvanize dialogue, inspire action, and challenge the inertia of entrenched power. Activists, educators, and ordinary citizens began to see their own potential reflected in her courage, recognizing that advocacy is not limited to elected office. It is the persistent voice, the measured argument, the principled action that pushes society forward. Crockett had not only articulated a vision, she had modeled the path for those willing to step into their own courage. Even for those who had initially doubted her, the impact was undeniable. The villain's attempts to maintain control, to obscure her message, or to diminish her authority only reinforced the contrast between integrity and arrogance. Where they relied on spectacle and manipulation, Crockett relied on preparation, empathy, and unshakable moral clarity. Her triumph was quiet but total, demonstrating that leadership built on principle cannot be easily shaken, and that truth, when delivered with courage, resonates louder than any manufactured narrative. Her message extended beyond policy debates. It was a lesson in resilience, a call to embrace responsibility, and an affirmation that individual conviction matters. The courage to speak up, the patience to listen, the willingness to confront injustice, these were the true measures of influence. Crockett had shown that leadership is not about asserting dominance or silencing opposition. It is about illuminating the path forward, empowering others to see possibilities, and creating a culture where fairness and dignity are not optional ideals but guiding principles. As the nation absorbed the full weight of what had occurred, the lesson became clear. Change does not arrive through passivity. Courage, clarity, and moral integrity are contagious. They inspire dialogue, provoke reflection, and compel action. One person standing firmly in truth can awaken awareness across an entire society, challenging apathy and igniting hope where cynicism once prevailed. Crockett's vision was not confined to her words alone. It had become a catalyst, an invitation to every citizen to consider their own role in shaping a more just and compassionate world. In the end, the story was simple yet profound. When dignity meets determination, and when principle guides action, transformation is inevitable. Crockett's example reminded the nation that leadership is not measured by applause, by ratings, or by temporary victories. It is measured by the lasting impact of integrity, courage, and the refusal to remain silent in the face of injustice. Her journey illuminated a timeless truth. One voice, rooted in conviction and amplified by courage, can ripple across communities, influence national discourse, and inspire a generation to act with purpose. And as viewers internalized this lesson, they were left with a challenge of their own: to carry the vision forward, to speak with clarity, and to live with courage. The moment was not just Crockett's. It was a call to every individual willing to rise above fear and complacency, and to believe that their actions, grounded in justice, guided by integrity, could shape the world. Jasmine Crockett had spoken, and the studio had fallen silent. Her vision had pierced through doubt, arrogance, and skepticism, leaving an undeniable imprint on everyone watching. Kaitlan Collins' reaction was more than a moment of surprise. It was recognition of something rare, something powerful. A leader who embodied integrity, courage, and unwavering commitment to justice. This was not just a victory in a single broadcast. It was a triumph for every person who has ever felt overlooked, dismissed, or silenced. And now, the story does not end here. It continues with you. Every share, every comment, every conversation you spark carries forward the message that leadership rooted in principle matters. Amplify the voices that challenge injustice. Celebrate those who act with courage when others remain silent. Stand with communities whose struggles too often go unnoticed. When we collectively recognize and uplift integrity, we shape a culture where truth and empathy prevail. If this moment inspired you, let it ripple outward. Subscribe to follow stories of courage and leadership that refuse to settle for complacency. Share this video to ensure more people witness the impact of principled advocacy. Join the conversation in the comments. Your voice matters. By engaging, you become part of a movement that values dignity over spectacle, action over apathy, and courage over fear. Jasmine Crockett's vision was bold. Her presence was unforgettable. And the world changed one voice at a time. Now it's your turn to rise, to speak, and to act. Together, we can ensure that moments like this do more than inspire. They transform.